Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. I am so glad you're joining us today because we are mapping out something absolutely massive. We're going to model a cascading economic earthquake, something that economists and geopolitical strategists are calling the nightmare scenario. Now, this entire explainer is focused purely on a hypothetical 2026 global conflict, specifically a war involving Iran that spills way beyond regional borders and literally strikes at the lifelines of our modern interconnected world. We're going to dive deep into the data to see exactly how a shockwave like this would ripple across the globe.
I want to kick things off by framing our whole discussion around this really stark realization. Our modern lifestyle isn't built on solid ground. It's floating on a thin layer of oil in a narrow strait. You know, we constantly think of our fast-paced digital world as being completely untethered from physical geography, like we're just living in the cloud, right? But the reality is that the internet, our supply chains, the food on our tables, it all relies entirely on incredibly fragile physical geographic choke points. And if just one of those snaps, well, the illusion of our untethered modern lifestyle shatters almost instantly.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the jugular of energy. So let's look at the geographic epicenter, the Strait of Hormuz. It's a critical maritime choke point situated directly between Iran and Oman. And here's the crazy part. It is only 21 miles wide at its absolute narrowest point. To put that into perspective for a second, 21 miles is actually shorter than a lot of people's daily commute to work. It is an incredibly tiny physical space, effectively just a sliver of water. Yet its role in the global macroeconomic machine is absolutely massive.
Just look at this sheer volume of energy moving through that tiny 21-mile gap. We're talking roughly 20 to 25% of the entire world's daily oil consumption passing through this one specific strait every single day. And it's not even just oil. A massive portion of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, mostly originating from Qatar, is also squeezed right through this exact same bottleneck. Literally a quarter of the globe's energy heartbeat is pumping through a vein that is barely 24 miles wide.
So, what exactly is the trigger in this 2026 scenario? In partially mapping out the mechanics here, a conflict wouldn't actually require massive naval armadas clashing in the water. The strait could be rendered totally impassable for commercial tankers through asymmetrical means. We're talking the deployment of sea mines, low-cost drone swarms, and shore-based anti-ship missiles. And here is the really crucial point. You don't even need to sink a single ship to close the strait. Just the mere threat of these weapons causes global shipping insurance rates to skyrocket instantly. And when tankers can't get insured, they simply don't sail. Just like that, the Persian Gulf is effectively closed.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Section 2, a global power outage.
$200. That is the immediate visceral shock to the system. Models project that within 48 hours of a total closure of the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices would violently surge past $150, likely hitting or even exceeding $200 per barrel. And we really have to remember, this isn't just about the painful price you're paying at the gas pump. Oil is the baseline for the entire global economy. This price spike instantly hits the cost of manufacturing every plastic product, the fuel for every commercial flight, and the diesel for every single delivery truck on the highway.
But here's the thing. The shock waves actually manifest differently depending on where you live. The oil shock, that's broad, it's global. It raises the cost of all petroleum products and international shipping for absolutely everyone. But the LNG shortage, that is a localized catastrophe, specifically hitting Europe. Europe is already weary from the loss of Russian gas over the last few years. So, without Qatari liquefied natural gas making it through the strait, nations like Germany, France, and the UK would face unsustainable winter heating costs. And that leads directly to forced, widespread industrial shutdowns.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is Section 3, the fertilizer connection.
A lot of people don't realize this, but energy is literally food. There's this terrifying hidden link in the global supply chain, and it plays out in a fatal step-by-step sequence. Step 1, the natural gas shortage we literally just talked about. See, natural gas isn't just for heating, it's the primary ingredient used to manufacture nitrogen-based fertilizers. Which brings us to step 2, a massive spike in global fertilizer prices. Step 3 is where it actually hits the soil. With fertilizer costs absolutely astronomical, farmers in global breadbaskets, places like the US, Brazil, and Ukraine, are forced to plant way less. And that leads directly to step 4, a delayed but massive global food shortage. When you factor in that fueling the cargo ships to transport that smaller harvest now costs twice as much, the price of a simple loaf of bread thousands of miles away can easily double or triple.
Which brings us to Section 4, continental dominoes fall.
Our global village is just deeply interconnected. When the supply lines snap, every continent takes a unique, devastating hit. Over in Asia, you're looking at industrial stagflation. In Europe, a rapid deindustrialization. In Africa, severe humanitarian crises. And in the Americas, a raging inflationary fire. Let's break these localized impacts down just a little bit further to see how it works.
Focusing heavily on Europe for a moment, this war pushes energy prices to 400% of their normal baseline, 4 times the normal cost. At that price, heavy industries, we're talking massive steel manufacturing, chemical plants, automotive manufacturing, they simply cannot compete on a global scale. And this isn't just a temporary pause either. Economists model this as a permanent deindustrialization for Europe, as those factories are forced to shut their doors for good.
Moving over to Asia and Africa, the human and developmental costs here are just immense. China, Japan, and South Korea are the world's largest importers of Persian Gulf oil. Without it, Asia's manufacturing heartbeat falters, and massive infrastructure initiatives like China's Belt and Road projects, they simply stall out as domestic survival takes priority. Meanwhile, many African nations operate as what economists call price takers on the global market. So when food and fuel prices mathematically skyrocket, they have to absorb that blow directly. The models show this resulting in immediate humanitarian crises, widespread hunger, and inevitable political instability.
Now, you might be wondering, what about energy powerhouses like the US, Canada, or Brazil? Well, they are absolutely not immune. They are firmly bound to a global commodity market. Even if a barrel of oil is pumped right out of the ground in Texas, it's still going to be sold at that global $200 Hormuz price. The resulting inflation from those fuel and food costs would force central banks across the Americas to combat the fire by raising interest rates to crippling levels. We are talking rates the likes of which haven't been seen since the 1980s.
Entering our final chapter here, Section 5, the new global economy.
And as brilliantly illustrates how the aftermath of a crisis like this triggers a fundamental, permanent shift in global logistics. For decades, the old world operated on just-in-time delivery, this highly globalized, hyper-efficient shipping model designed to keep inventory low and profits high. But the new world, it totally abandons that fragile efficiency. We move straight into a just-in-case economy. Nations and corporations will mandate incredibly expensive localized stockpiling. Essentially, everything you buy becomes way more expensive to produce and store, but the entire system becomes vastly more resilient to geographic shocks.
There is also a deeply ironic outcome to this massive fossil fuel crisis. The conflict actually acts as a hyper-accelerator for the green energy transition. Governments won't just view the internal combustion engine as a long-term climate issue anymore. No, they're going to view it as an immediate, critical national security liability. So the transition to renewables, grid independence, and nuclear power is fast-tracked with literal wartime urgency, simply to detach from the vulnerabilities of the Middle East.
But getting to that resilient future comes at a staggering macroeconomic cost. Most economists predict that just the first year of this conflict would trigger a global GDP contraction of 3 to 5%. Think about that. This Great Recession 2.0 represents a hit significantly larger and far more visceral than the devastating 2008 financial crisis.
Which brings us to the end of our model today and leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. A closure of the Strait of Hormuz effectively disconnects our entire global village. So the big question for 2026 isn't just who wins the tactical war in the Gulf, it's whether our deeply intertwined global economy can actually survive the peace that follows. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the data, and I'll see you all next time.